mind. And I really think that in the end, what we write is an expression of our state of mind. And that applies not just to the author of a book, or the writer of a poem, or the composer of music, or the writer of a song, but to any written communication we choose to engage in.
The late William Sapphire's column for the New York Times Magazine on language, I remember he really got down heavily on the idea that we were misusing words, changing their usage, even changing their meaning.
I think so, but that doesn't upset me. I mean, change is inevitable. I am not a millennial. I'm not a Generation Xer. I'm not going to presume to judge what it is that's meaningful to them. What I will say, though, is in order to break rules well, you need to know the rules. It helps to know what you are breaking. It gives structure and meaning, even if your goal is to be unstructured and vague in meaning. If Jack Kerouac could write The Subterraneans in nonstop, god-awful stream of consciousness that is virtually impossible for anybody to read unless they're in an altered state, he still needed to know what rules he was breaking in order for it to be effective. So I would argue that a rap artist or someone who really chooses to butcher syntax as a mode of expression is going to be better at it if they understand what they're breaking. That's a general rule that applies even to great artists. Look at the evolution of Picasso. Look at what he ended up with and what he started with. His paintings were very pedestrian and typical to start, and by the end, almost incomprehensible. Yet they got there by deconstructing everything he had learned. That's my way of answering your question. I'm going to actually insert a little anecdote into that. I had a wonderful English teacher in high school. I went to high school in New York City, finished high school there at an elite private day school called Trinity School, which had its share of pretty lousy teachers, I may add. But it also had a few diamonds in the rough. And one of them was George Mayer, who was our English teacher in high school. And poor George, we put him through just absolute hell. Certainly in an all-male day school, the poor guy, we really gave him a very, very hard time. And he didn't deserve it, but we didn't know better. For all that, he was a tremendous believer in the power of correct English. He had Mr. Mayer's 100 favorite errors of diction, syntax, and grammar. And Adam, you may remember Mimeo sheets. You remember you used to hold them up and inhale them and get high?
Oh, yes. I so remember those mimeograph sheets.
Okay. He used to hand out these Mimeo sheets, and each of his favorite errors was labeled 1 through 100. Well, we would give in our papers, and we would get them back with 76, 82, 9, 8, 59, whatever, all over the paper in red ink with big exclamation points. And the deal with him was he would give it back to you, and if you rewrote the paper, fixed the errors by going back to his glossary and fixing it and turned it back in, he would up your grade. Well, who wouldn't do that? The beauty of it is after 2 or 3 times you didn't need to do it anymore because you know all the rules. It had a profound impact on me and really changed my life because it made me realize how much I enjoyed this exercise of writing. I never thanked him. Back in the early 90s, 25 years or whatever after I graduated, I suddenly thought, everybody asks me how I got into writing. Say there was this teacher, and I realized I'd never thanked him. I called the school, and of course he'd retired. They wouldn't give me his phone number. I gave them mine. I said, would you please have him call me, ask him if he remembers, blah, blah, blah. And he called. He said, yeah, I remember you. And I said, can I take you out to dinner? I said, sure. And I went, and he said, why are you doing this? I said, I never thanked you. I just watched his face and how much he enjoyed that. And I say that not to pat myself. I think I actually felt better than he did. It was like a load off because it really made me appreciate what someone who teaches you the importance of good writing can mean to you. My hope is that anybody who's listening to this podcast who is not an author will realize that good writing is clearly much more than just a means to putting together a tome. It's a way of living. I have a number of friends whose children are going to journalism school, and a lot of people say, why are you doing that? I'm probably among them. I never went to journalism school. The more I've thought about it, whether there are jobs in journalism or not, if you're going to be an American civilization major or an English major or something, I mean, you might as well be a journalism major and learn how to write. Take it as such. Don't worry about whether it's going to get you a job in news. There's no news anymore anyway. It's all garbage, with some exceptions, but it's not what it used to be. Mind you, nothing is. But it's a tremendous way to learn the craft of putting words down. And you can always decide later what you want to do and go to graduate school or become a stockbroker or whatever the heck it is you want to do. But I think one of the real values of that kind of school or a creative writing major is to get people to understand the power of words. Because in the end, what are you and I doing, Adam? We're exchanging words.
Good writing in books as a key element of effective communication in the media, in the blogosphere, in business, in personal relationships. Is there a way for you to tie this all in together?
Yes, I think there is. First of all, everybody will have, who reads it all, will have their favorite authors. If it's really a favorite author, it's someone whose books you have read several times. For me, it's John Steinbeck. I still think that Grapes of Wrath is the great American novel. I can't think of another book. People say Moby Dick, they say any of the Mark Twain books, whatever. I mean, everybody has. I still think that there's no book that expresses the power of faith and belief and persistence against just such monumental disasters. This is a book that should be just an absolute, just tear you apart, but it's so uplifting because of the power of faith in people who are just constantly destroyed. What I like about the book is its narrative form, the way in which Steinbeck, and in his other books as well, he sort of has these sentences that run. They go up and then they go down and then they go up again, like you're going up and down on a road in a valley. And they kind of, they're the anti-Hemingway. It's done in a way, if you read it aloud, it sings. What that says to me when I'm writing is I want the person who is reading this to feel that they're moving. I want them to feel motion. I want them to feel that they're going from a beginning to an end. And how they get there, if I'm writing a proposal for business, obviously it's not going to be flowery, but it's still going to have some pace to it. Even, quite frankly, like that example I gave you from the newsroom. I drew on Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It was for content, it was for a metaphor, but good writing sticks with you. I will bet you a good number of people listening to this podcast have favorite passages they carry with them. If they don't know it verbatim, they know it at least to paraphrase.
With a finite amount of words in the English language, we can only rearrange them.
Yeah, I mean, you can't plagiarize entire sections and claim them as your own, especially if you're trying to come across with original thought. But there is not a writer in the world that hasn't borrowed an idea or a simile or a metaphor or an image, maybe even a turn of phrase, and found whatever it is that attracted you to it is going to be yours, not that other author's. So you can take that, pull it out of its content, put it in something that is in your context, and I would say it's yours.
I want to go back to the idea of effective communication in all its forms, the media, the blogosphere, business, and how a writer can use those tools to create better writing.
All right. When you write to traditional media, it's a voice, mine, to the audience, you. It's one way. When you write to the blogosphere, or you write social media, online communities, if you are one voice talking to an audience, they will tune you out. They need to be engaged. You need to be part of a much larger conversation that goes in other places. So in today's world, where media is now cross-platform, when you are writing, you need to write for multiple media platforms that have different types of interactions with the audience or the community that you're engaging with. And you have to understand the nuances and the differences. If you're really, really fortunate, you might be able to write one piece that works across all of them. Or in other cases, you have to go back and take what you wrote, say, for a newspaper, even for the newspaper's online edition, but rewrite it for a social media posting. I mean, Twitter, you got to get it down to 140 characters. Point is that how you take the essence of something you wrote in one place and try and get the same point across, but in a different platform to a different audience in a different form of interaction, is an extremely complex thing, actually, because you have to change your wording, you have to change your pacing, you have to change your tone, you have to change your voice. You actually sometimes almost shouldn't have a voice. You should have just big ears. These are the kinds of fun things that the new media, the blogosphere, the internet, all these online communities have, whether you're sharing words or images or videos or whatever. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it is an exercise in using writing in a much different way than we did 15 years ago.
Have many of the old-timers adapted well to new media?
The ones I know tend to be already engaged in it, and they would have been shut out if they hadn't adapted. I do think, though, that the key is not to presume that just because you are older and, quote, wiser, that you actually know any better, because sometimes that wisdom is a straitjacket. What you really need to do is observe and listen. In answer to your question, because of my profession and the number of people that I deal with on a regular basis, that's not too much of a problem, but I would imagine that generally speaking, it is. It takes discipline to rein yourself back and say, I'm in a different world here, and I may still be putting letters on paper or electrons on a screen. They mean and come across in a completely different way, and I need to learn what I'm getting into before I actually do it.
I hid behind the camera almost all the time. I got to do something besides take pictures. I got to listen, and I learned from what I heard.
Communication, in the end, is what this is all about, and there are many, many different ways to communicate. Anybody who writes should be a better writer if they draw upon the inspiration they get from painting, from music, from poetry. Goal is to have your synapses work differently, so when the words are put down on paper or on the electronic screen, they actually are held together by more than just syntax and grammar and diction. They are held together by a place in your mind that somehow, by the order that those words came out, is conveyed. There's real truth in the famous saying by George Bernard Shaw. He said the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. It is an extremely powerful statement. Just because you're putting something down on paper or writing a song or making a painting doesn't mean that what you intended is how it's going to be received. And understanding that, taking those words and framing them properly and making them sound, if you have a soft message, let the words sound soft. Those are the challenges. I'm a firm believer that you need to read out loud what you have written. Now, that may not apply for social media and for some of the electronic communication anymore because it's done in bursts. If you are writing phrases and paragraphs and longer form thoughts, reading it aloud is a different way of experiencing the words and will trigger different reactions from you as you play with it. I learned that from a professor. I'm sure he's long dead by now. Though I didn't major in English, I took a lot of English courses because I always liked writing. I had a professor of American poetry named Robert Regan, and what did I know or care about American poetry? Nothing. But I figured, hey, I'll take it. What the heck? And so I read John Berryman and Robert Lowell and all these people I'd never heard of before. But what just transformed me was Dr. Regan. Here was this guy who looked like he'd had 10 bottles of scotch before coming into class. His cheeks bright red, his eyes just aflame, clearly Irish. He would get up and stand on a chair or stand on his desk in front of this bunch of late 60s, early 70s students looking at him like this guy had lost his marbles. And he would read the poems aloud, screaming them, jumping up and down. And I finally went up to him one day. I said, Dr. Regan, why do you do that? May I ask you, why do you do that? And he looked at me. He goes, young man, no word is written that shouldn't be yelled out and screamed out to the universe. And he walked away. I'm not really quite sure what he meant. All I know is that I just remembered there was a heck of a lot more to reading and writing than just reading and writing.
You're a songwriter.
Yep.
Do you think that has made you a completely different songwriter than you would have been without all this knowledge?
I probably wouldn't have become a songwriter without that appreciation because my approach to songwriting is the lyrics first and the music second. I would really consider myself more of a lyricist than a musician. I'm a decent musician and I perform and, I have a duo with a friend of mine and we do gigs and things like that. That's a lot of fun. But really, my songs are stories that I write out. One thing I did learn, though, is just because a song is good therapy doesn't make it a good song. Going back to what I said earlier, you have to sort of put yourself in the audience's seat and say, what am I singing that they can relate to? What am I writing? As I told you, I got married last year and got stuck in traffic one day. So I was sitting there. What are you going to do? And I started to write a song about being stuck on this bridge. But I wrote one line where I said, I hold a flower, I feel its power when my thoughts turn to beauty and grace. because in that rose is an image I know as the contours and lines of your face. I really liked that line because I could visualize